All right. So today is our first meeting to talk about Heidegger. I know this initially was supposed to be about, you know, yeah, I mean, it's about reading Heidegger. Since I'm starting a kind of asynchronous reading group and reading schedule. If anybody's interested, I can give you guys my, what's it called? I'm so bad at this. Um, what's the app called? Discord. I give you
Discord.
guys I made a
We have a lot
Discord.
of apps, to be fair.
Right. I made a Discord for Heidegger. If people want to like share their thoughts and talk about what stands out to them. The meetings are kind of gonna be off the cuff. But anyways, I have Sam with me, and she's also trying to read Heidegger too. And we came across an insight into Heidegger. So, I guess instead of just being like, oh, how are we going to introduce it? I think we could introduce it from the perspective of like, what's Heidegger's potential here? Um,
Mhm.
and so I guess I'll just kind of like, just so people get kind of acquainted with what we're trying to talk about, kind of maybe I can just build like the surface thought, like the epiphany we had today, and then we could just like go in on it and like really like elaborate or, you know. So to begin with, so Heidegger is concerned with the meaning of being. Um, he believes that we have what he calls a pre-ontological understanding. Pre-ontological understanding might be similar to what we call today as like intuition. We have like an intuition about being, but because we don't articulate that, we don't really know. We have a sort of different understanding of knowing. So our understanding of knowing is more pragmatic. It's more hands-on. It's more, you might say, embodied. Um, so that's really important for Heidegger because that means that we are not thinking about things abstractly. We are thinking about things actually very embodied and pragmatically. And that thinking word is actually more like I know by doing, not knowing by
Mm.
intellectualization, right? So building this background, what Heidegger calls being in the world, so we're being in the world, and the first entities we encounter is what Heidegger calls being ready at hand. And these are items, equipment that we fundamentally work with, we manipulate, we create with, and so on. So we're talking about hammers, we're talking about cars, we're talking about all these other things. But the thing is, they're not actually things. They might be called pragmatic things before they're actually just things. They're not just
Mhm.
things, they're pragmatic things. All right. So where Samantha and I got hooked up on is Heidegger, because I've been talking just to give more context on the side. Sam and I have been talking about feminine, masculine a lot. And Sam's been doing a lot of great work on that. So I can't help but also think about that stuff when I'm reading Heidegger. Um, so I was talking to my girlfriend today, and she made this joke about, yeah, like women, belong in the kitchen or something, right? It's like sarcastic kind of remark. But that remark made an epiphany happen because it basically said something that I'm not sure if Heidegger actually assumes is possible. At least he doesn't assert it openly. Is that not only can Dasein, us human beings, um, not only do we reduce ourselves to things, but actually there's a possibility that we reduce ourselves primarily as ready to hand, as equipment. And this is huge because that means that even if Heidegger is wrong about the meaning of being, about whatever, he's given us some really cool diagnostic materials to explain that maybe maybe Heidegger's even wrong here. Maybe we don't even reduce ourselves to things. Actually, we reduce ourselves to ready at hand.
Mhm.
First. So yeah, so that means that gender or social norms, for example, would be something that actually get reduced to equipment in terms of use. And then that means that once social norms break and they, so to speak, get out of place, that's when we acknowledge that's a social norm, that we have
Mhm.
a social norm, right?
Mhm.
Once something breaks, and it's really funny because, when somebody like wears a dress or like, and that's a man, right? You don't know it's a social norm until someone has broken the status quo of that. And that's how we
Mhm.
gain access to the social norm, right? So that means that actually we do treat social norms as a kind of equipment, as a kind of things that have purpose and use. But we don't think about that because, like Heidegger says, things that are ready at hand are not something that we cognize. It's something that we simply are always conducting ourselves in the world, sort of with a pre-ontological understanding. So that means we lack articulation for the social norms that are there and given. But yeah, now I'll open the space now that I've fully introduced what this epiphany is. Now, Sam, you can just go in however you want.
I'll just input my random thoughts that come up because that's how this works. So I always think about how so before a woman becomes pregnant, she is already kind of reduced to a tool because she carries a tool that is ready at hand, which is she has the ability to give birth. And once she gets pregnant, that is, like you were saying, reflected back onto like that structure of society. And the way I am still working out the feminine and the masculine, but the way I see the masculine is like basically what we see right in front of us,
Mm-hmm.
and the structure
Mm-hmm.
of everything. So it reflects back, her being pregnant reflects back onto that structure. And then the structure kind of goes back into the woman and projects um, that she is a tool for use. So, kind of veering off course here, women will say, for example, men make me feel like an object.
Mm-hmm.
And men will be like, I don't understand what you're saying. I see you as a human. But that's the thing. They're not seeing it because her being pregnant and her like caring for the baby continuously, because that's already like a structure set in society, because she's already doing that continuously. Her carrying for the baby becomes like the hammer, and
Right.
so she almost becomes that tool,
Right.
because it's and because she becomes that tool, it becomes invisible, or like
Mm-hmm.
it reflects back as like nothing or as invisible. And so like that nothingness reflects back into like the why, that feminine why.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was like, well, I just feel like an object.
Right.
And I hope I kind of explained that
No,
how I
no, you're
wanted to,
explaining it well. Yeah.
um, but it's a lot of like reflecting back to each other. So it's like
Right.
reflecting into the what, and then the what goes into the why. And the why is kind of like the way I look at the feminine. It's like a big like void of data, and it just has like everything everywhere all at once. and it's like all the whys tangled up together that then like reflects back onto the that masculine structure. So I think, you know, a lot of women will say, well, how do I get a man to not see me as an object or a tool? I think what needs, or I don't know what needs to happen necessarily, but my idea is that maybe that structure needs to break down in some way by looking inward towards the why. And then I'll hand it over to you.
Well, I mean, so there's a couple interesting things, right? Like, one, it makes me think the possibility, and this is just me being playful here, it makes me think the possibility that there's two types of reductions dialectically happening.
Mhm.
So there's the present at hand, what Heidegger calls, you know, when it just becomes a thing, when we're wondering about its thinghood, right?
Mhm.
So the thinghood is really interesting because this is like when you see the Republicans say, like, what is a woman? That's so interesting because what the reason why that's interesting is because when you say something like what is a woman, that's not Dasein, that's saying that you're an object.
Mhm.
So saying what is a woman just reaffirms actually the thinghood of woman.
Mhm.
Um but anyways, the thing that I'm trying to get at here is maybe there's a split masculine. A
Mhm.
split masculine in the sense there might be a redemptive masculine, but it's also the curse at the same time. What do I mean by that? The redemptive masculine is at the same time when something becomes present at hand. Because Heidegger's argument is it's when something is ready at hand that we don't question it. We don't even see it, right?
Mhm.
We don't see it. So that means that we have a masculinity that doesn't see it, right? Because everything is ready at hand. Woman is ready at hand, object, equipment, supposed to perform her role. Um, but then here's what's interesting. Only the woman, because she becomes ready at hand, is able to see herself as a present at hand. Because she's like, wait a second, I'm not an object, right? That's weird to me. Why am I an object? So it fractures her and it throws her out into from going from ready to hand to present at hand, where she's looking at herself and a kind of
Mhm.
bewilderment. Like, am I a thing? Right?
Mhm.
And it's at that moment that you could say something like feminism comes about, right? Let's just entertain this speculation. Feminism comes about and saying, I am not a ready at hand. Okay, so how do men then see it? Well, men start to see it according to the way Heideggerian theory works, is that you make the ready at hand no longer function as an item. Basically, the woman says, I am not a thing. I am not a hammer for you. And then it ruptures the social norm. Here's where we discover there is a patriarchy, there is a social normativity, there is
Mhm.
such thing as women being treated as objects because it was the woman that was thrown from um, ready at hand to present at hand, looked at herself and was like, am I a thing? Um, and then because of that, you throw out because the thing about understanding what's so important to understand about equipment for Heidegger is that equipment refers to everything else. So that means equipment refers to totality of equipment. That means the hammer refers to the thing that needs to be hammered, the nails, everything else. So everything refers to everything else that requires hammering or supports hammering, right? So that means that once the woman goes out of the equipment, she actually fractures the totality of the ready at hand. She fractures the totality of the equipment. And that's how it becomes seen. It becomes seen when that happens. Um, and so it's interesting. I think it's like, it's weird because obviously Heidegger doesn't, I mean, maybe he does, but I don't think he's going to go into these possibilities, mainly because the way the book is heading is Heidegger saying the whole premise of the book is we have a misunderstanding of being because we decided to conflate ourselves as things versus a being or a type of being, Dasein, right? So Heidegger's not going to go into this, but I didn't expect how much force this ready to hand concept could actually explain why social mores exist and why social mores can be invisible as a kind of familiarity because we are being in the world. Social mores conduct with a kind of purpose. They're like equipment. They shouldn't be, but they are once they become familiar to us. So yeah, so again, to go back to the redemptive masculinity, the redemptive masculinity can possibly be found in the present hand because that's where we could possibly look and see like, oh, this is like when you see like the doorknob's broken. The doorknob is a doorknob, right? This is a social more. That's the possibility that we can see as a kind of redemptive masculinity. It has the possibility of being redemptive because it can show or possibly reveal the fracture of a social norm that was not able to be seen until it was fractured. And so that means that, and here's where I'll be curious, and I think you agreed with this last time I talked to you, was maybe the feminine. And this is the part that I think Heidegger, I wish he was like, because he's actually drawing a lot of force from familiarity, from the pre-ontological understanding of being, right? His gripe is that we interpret it wrong. That's fine, but I think in some sense we're always going to interpret it wrong, because of contingency. But that means that the feminine is the very source that gives birth to interpretation of being. Because it's the
Yes.
pre-ontological understanding. However, because we have to interpret, we fall under, you could say, a split masculine present at hand and ready at hand.
Yes.
So it's like,
I agree with all of that. And oh gosh, what was I going to say? I was listening so much that I just like the thought just went whoop. Okay, so an idea did pop up in my head because we use the example of a woman getting pregnant because that's a really easy example to think of. But I do want to shift it to men because I think maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm off the mark here, but I think this example could explain it, could explain this reflection of the feminine going out to the masculine and then reflecting back again into the feminine, and that invisibility, and that when you said it broke, like the doorknob broke, you realize that it's a doorknob. So I would say that when we think of men, the way that they become tools in society is like there's a natural, we think of them as protectors.
Right.
But protectors of what?
Right.
Because men will often say, well, I'm supposed to protect the woman. What is he protecting the woman from? Usually other men in society. And when he acknowledges that that he is protecting her from other men in society, I think, like what you were saying, I think that's where the split happens. Because if you say, well, I'm just a protector, kind of like you say, oh, women are just able to have children
Mm-hmm.
and women just do this. The invisibility is there. But when a woman gets pregnant or a man acknowledges that he's protecting the woman from other men,
Mm-hmm.
that man then has to look inside of himself and be like, oh, I am also capable of that kind of deal. I don't know if that makes.
Right. I mean, because the one key feature, right, which I think is very pivotal to understanding the character of equipment, is Heidegger calls it, it's a in order to,
Mhm.
right? So I'm a man in order to what? In order to protect a woman, right? Or provide for my, family, right? I am a woman for what? In order to give birth to children and take care of them and take care of my husband. So it's so weird to me that Heidegger, I mean, I'm not going to blame him for this, but like, I think his distinction, like, you could have wrote a whole book on this distinction between the ready at hand and present at hand, because I think it's such a pivotal distinction, pivotal, absolutely huge distinction.
Mhm.
So yeah, I agree with you, and I was curious about how would you feel about if we approach it from the idea of children, because I was thinking, okay, so how does, because if we're always being in the world, things are familiar. Well, when a child gets thrown into the world, um, I'm kind of borrowing from Freud here, because Freud kind of admits, like, a child starts to get curious about sexuality, right?
Mhm.
But I'm just gonna that's the only Freudian point that I'm gonna make. But then I'm gonna add, it's when the child gets curious about sexuality that they get introduced to the social mores of sexuality, right? Oh, you're a
Mhm.
boy, boys don't cry, yada yada. I mean, even if we want to take a more modern or like liberal point of view, it would be like it's still the same thing. It would be like, you can choose your gender, just tell me what you want to be. You can be a boy, you can be a girl if you want to. But again, it's still the same concept. It's the fact that the child becomes curious about their sexuality and what it means, and that's when the parents or society that reduces itself as equipment, that reduces itself as ready to hand, that the child then is introduced to ready at handedness. So they're like, oh, okay, so I'm a boy in order to become a man. I'm a
Mhm.
girl in order to become a woman. And women behave like this. And men behave like this. And, you know, they have all these features to them.
Mhm.
So,
And I will say, oh, sorry, you go
okay,
ahead.
no, that's it. That's it. Go ahead.
Um, and I will say that having this ready, ready at hand or ready to hand structure is very beneficial for society to
Mhm.
thrive. Like, we
Right.
do need it. However, in order to expand, you have to go into that why. And I actually think, because you brought up children, I think that children start in this mode of why.
Right. Right.
Because I think of my own children and they're just like sponges, 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 sponges.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think it was the Catholic Church that said that like children become, it's something about significant about the age of 7.
Mhm.
It's almost like the age of 7 kind of like solidifies, they can understand more about right and wrong or something like that.
Right. 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 Mhm.
Um, but I primarily think that they are in that why mode. And then once they start living, like, because they're thrown into the world, once they start living and being, then the things they come across reflect onto them. And then they gain a why. And then they reflect it back. And then that reflects back and they gain another why. And it like kind of accumulates until it gets to a point where there's a solid structure and it becomes, oh, like to be a boy means they don't cry because that's what society has structured it to be. Excuse me. Or to be a girl means like you paint your nails.
Right.
And like I said, it is good for or to have a structure like this in order to have a basis of society. But it becomes, I think it becomes problematic when the tool and the continuous movement of the tool becomes invisible. Because then we're not, and Heidegger, I read this a while back, so I may be saying it wrong, but he said something like seeing things for the first time. So I think it's important in order, or like, and obviously we're going to forget. Right. But it's almost like making a point to see the thing as it is again for the first time, like in an authentic manner. And so it's like noticing that there is a disruption or a break in the doorknob to actually realize that it is a doorknob. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
So I do like your explanation on the accumulative whys. Because I feel like that makes sense to me as a child. You know, it's
there's
like
a lot of whys.
There's a lot of whys, right? There's a lot of whys. Like, it's almost like a phenomenological like container for all the whys of like how things they're trying to bring into being with their whys. So I really like that because it's like it's not like a basically you're trying to say like it's not like it's a developmental ready-to-handedness, you could say.
Yes.
It's a coming to be of ready-to-handedness. Which is funny because then it's like, you know, what would they be before that, right? Would they just be in a maybe we need a new distinction, right? They would just be in a ready-to-handedness because obviously they're not thinking or they're not how can I put this? They're not like looking at things cognitively in that sense. Or maybe they could be. Maybe there actually are, but yeah, it would seem like they almost have like a ready-to-handedness mode of being to themselves because they are asking these whys. But the whys that they receive are not cognitive whys. They're just repetitions from a ready-to-handedness of the parents, family, society. So they're not actual intellectual engagements. Or at least they're not perceptive engagements like, okay, you want to know what a woman is? Here, look. You know, because it's not just that. it's like the perception of like, here's a woman and this is what they have and what they look like. It's never just that. It's always veiled over on top of that, like what the role is first, you know? So it's always, I would say if we're taking like just like a standard developmental approach, they start getting questions about the body when they notice something different, either about themselves or about others. So
Mm-hmm.
that ready-to-handedness, I would say, this is what I would say. I would say I think children have a body ready-to-handedness, and that adults have a social normativity of ready-to-handedness, or like, yeah, something like that. Because the child, in my opinion, I don't think is actually actively thinking about their gender, where they're not like,
Mm-mm.
and neither is the parents either. But if they get questioned about it, they rely on what they already know, what they're already familiar with, right? But the child, because he's so curious, is treats his body kind of like, his body is almost like invisible. And I think that's why I would say they're more like body ready to hand versus like maybe society is more like gendered ready to hand, right? Their gender is invisible because they already accept the social normativity of it.
Mm-hmm.
The children are body invisible, which is why they're so risky and curious and daring or whatever, because they're literally body invisible. Like they just like they don't know what danger looks like because they haven't experienced it. So they're like body invisible. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking like maybe they have a more acquaintance with their like body ready to handedness, but it's when something happens, like they fall, um, a parent tells them, hey, you got to be careful. You could break your legs, like all these like scary things that they never knew about. That's when you throw them out of their body ready to handedness and you make them to a present at hand where you're like, hey, look, your body objectively can break. Your body, you can bleed, you can cut yourself, you can die, if like they ever figure that possibility. Um, but once that is introduced, once they start to see themselves as a thing in the world, um, that's when the social norms, I would say, become to get filtrated in, slowly in, and it's because they're body blind that
That's
they are the
that's a
most,
really good point.
yeah, that they're the most
'Cause-
vulnerable to the social normativities, um, precisely because the benefit of social normativities is that it dictates how we should behave with our bodies.
so that's it's almost like a like you have a little round fishing net, but you've only got like when you're a kid, you've only got like the wires going around and you don't have the actual net. And
Right.
so it's like you're trying to catch a fish and then you can't catch the fish. You're just kind of swimming with the fishes, experiencing things around you. And then all of a sudden, like you add, it's like you add a twine or whatever is in a net. And you add each piece until you finally get that full net and you catch the fish. And also going back to the why, it made me think of something that I do with like my oldest daughter because she's starting to ask the really hard questions. And I'm like, I don't even know how to answer this. And I just started doing this by default because I mean it was easier. But I actually think it kind of breaks that structure of making them or of having them be caught in the net so quickly. And so
Mhm.
she'll say something like the other night, she was like, why can't I see God? And I was like, well, you want me to answer this religiously, philosophically? I don't know. But instead, I was just like, well, why do you think that you can't see God? And so instead of giving
Mhm.
her like an interpretation to reflect on her onto her, it was almost like shining the mirror back at her.
Mhm.
And so she had to continually sift through the question. And then she would give me an answer. I think she said something like, God's a cloud or something like that. And and then I reflected my answer onto her. And I wonder if, we started doing something like, well, I do believe there are some things that probably require a structure in society, like I said, to or in order to function. I do think some things like the philosophical and religious questions that children ask, I think it would help if we did reflect it back onto them first, so they have that opportunity to dive back into the why and actually find an authentic answer. It's like authentically, or going into that authentic mode of being. And Heidegger goes into this authenticity as well,
Right.
when he talks about. I'm trying to remember how my friend explained it to me. It's like when you're living inauthentically, you'll say, somebody will ask you like what you do, and you'll be like, oh, I'm a waiter, but that's not actually what you do.
Yeah.
But like what you are and what you do is actually so much more. And that's, I think, like the authenticity is where, or the authenticity lies within that void of the why.
Mm.
And then by reflecting authentically, that allows a like higher form of the structure to come into the masculine.
The one thing that you're pointing out to me that I feel like is really good, I feel like it's like ironically a very strong critique against Heidegger, which is, so Heidegger's young, right, in this project. He's young, he's ambitious, maybe even overly ambitious. He's trying to answer the freaking meaning of being. Okay. So he's writing this book trying to answer the freaking meaning of being, and his whole spice about it, his whole, he's getting his all panties in a bunch about it, is that we have fundamentally an inadequate interpretation of being because we just don't reflect on it, essentially. What's so interesting about this is that why does Heidegger think, maybe this is too soon for me to say this, it's probably too soon for me to say this, 100%. I know I'm going into like overly ambitious prejudging mode.
That's okay. We listen and we don't judge. We listen and we don't judge.
So I could be wrong about this. I'll keep this provisional. But as of right now, Heidegger wants us to give an adequate interpretation, right? But what you just proposed with the child example was that, what does it matter that we give an adequate interpretation? What might actually matter more is that we have an interpretation and that we try to give an interpretation. Because it's not just trying to give an adequate meaning of being. The biggest thing that we don't see is that we give an interpretation of being. And what you did by reflecting back your question, like, so why do you think you don't see God? That's basically you saying, so why are you interpreting the meaning of being as the fact that it's invisible and you can't see God? So basically, you just made them realize that they're giving an interpretation of being. And to me, that's a much more powerful move than saying like, no, we got to get it right. We got to get the meaning of being right. you know, because that's what Heidegger's trying to do, right? He's trying to say like what is actually ontological and what's not, right? Um, I think that's fair. However, I think it's still going to be blurred. Like his whole thing is like, yeah, we're blurring the ontic with the ontological. We have this pre-ontological understanding. That means we're familiar. That's how we're able to understand. But here's the really key point in Heidegger about letting. It's in chapter 3. He talks about, so how do we let an equipment be? And funny enough, it's because we have an understanding of being. Because we have an understanding of being, we are able to let an equipment be. That means that we can't let anything be as it is until we have this quote unquote understanding. So it means that maybe we can't let things be without having understanding that I give an interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's really the force of it. The fact that I can only let things be insofar as I understand that I give an interpretation of being.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of
And
like,
that's why,
yeah.
and that's why too, I think about with children, I've found that what is better than teaching something is giving them the environment in order to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if I give my daughter crayons and a coloring book, and I give her different options of like coloring, she can pick whatever option she wants. But I set that kind of like loose structure where
Mm-hmm.
she's able to still make an interpretation herself on what exactly it is that she wants to color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you brought up an important too about Heidegger. I I almost see him because he does use the hermeneutical method when he writes.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the way he writes is extremely head on. Like
Right.
he's just like it's almost like continually drilling down in the earth, like I will get to the center of the earth eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think I almost think he would have gotten, and again, I'm probably talking too early too, but I almost think that maybe he would have seen things differently had he taken a roundabout approach, and that is reflecting back and kind of leaving it be for a bit
Mm-hmm.
and leaving it up to interpretation, like posing a question and
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily trying to answer it, is more about like should he have gone into the mode or like the mode of why himself, kind of like childlike and like a child, and asked more questions than trying to actually answer them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what I'm thinking about is I think we're probably spot on with the early Heidegger, like everything that we're saying.
Mm.
I'm not sure if we're spot on with the late Heidegger because I know it gets more complicated with the later Heidegger because he definitely starts changing some of his stuff.
Yeah.
I know. Do you know
He does
Thomas?
write a lot of poetry
Right,
later.
right. Like
And that
let's
kind
see.
of like involves the why. A lot of like art and poetry and like literature, that is very much a why.
Right. So that's where I would say, because I don't really know that Heidegger that version of Heidegger that well. So I would feel like maybe this is where Heidegger starts understanding what he did wrong. And of course, like Being in Time didn't finish, right? Like it's an uncompleted work. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's questionable as to like why Heidegger. I mean, he did plenty of other writings, so why didn't he just continue it? Is something that gets put into question. But I still think we're spot on for the diagnosis of the early Heidegger. If we want to be generous to ourselves and generous to Heidegger, like that I still survive my critique, and also let Heidegger survive, because
Heidegger's rolling in his grave like, that's not what I meant.
Right. And I haven't finished Being in Time, so don't murder me, don't judge. But so yeah, I mean, but I'm still fascinated, because I'm still fascinated about the fact that we just come into the world with this strong familiarity, right? Like we're thrown, for some reason, we know what to do. We don't really think about it. It's not something we think about. It's just something we, like he calls it, circumspection. It's something we bodily know and do, and we don't ask why. But the why, this is why I like the pre-ontological understanding, is also the very thing that gives us the familiarity, is the very thing that also engenders and gives birth to life. Like it literally gives, like, the fact that it can give birth to interpretation is what gives us possibility of being in the world. Like, and Heidegger's all about possibility, so I'll give him that. But it's the fact that we can interpret being. And I think that's another crazy question. Like, why is it that we're the only beings, Dasein, that have to articulate and give an interpretation of being? Why do we have to give an interpretation of being? Why?
That's the big question.
Right? Like,
why?
It's not just because we haven't found the meaning of being. It's like, but why do we have to find the meaning of being? Why do we have to give a meaning of being? Yeah. But the thing is, the double impasse is we're still giving a meaning of being, even if we don't articulate it.
Even if we forget about it.
We're still giving a meaning of being.
And I think the forgetting part of it actually gives more impact in society than when you actually see it. Right.
Would you say it has like
because
more of
I would say because it's easier to make it invisible. It's easier to, like, because imagine if you're constantly thrown into like trying to reflect on something.
Right.
Like constantly thrown into the split of seeing everything for the first time as it is. Like, do you know how exhausting that would be?
Yeah, that would be horrible.
It would be awful. So in a way, the invisible is very very beneficial to us as humans. Right. But like you think about animals, they don't really question anything. They just do. And that is like in itself, it just is. And that kind of like exists in that invisibleness. And so I just thought of animals when you brought that up. Like, I don't know, but a wolf popped up in my mind. I'm just flowing through, grabbing what you're saying, like here and there. I'm like, this makes me think of this. That makes me think of that.
I think your idea of the forgetting being more impactful,
yeah,
makes sense. And it's also like, it's funny because like them forgetting is like more also pragmatic. It's
Mhm.
more practical to forget because we can't live practically. This is like proof that we live more like ready to handed beings because we just can't live with a cognitive active load the whole time. Like everything has to go back into a kind of being ready at hand kind of
Mhm.
thing. Right. So that's why it's so significant. Like when we mess up or when we make mistakes or, something pops out from the norm because then we're like, whoa, I made a mistake. Whoa, I forgot something. Whoa. And then we're like using our cognitive load. But then that's like when we really see those things for the first time. Um, or just like when I misplace my keys and I'm like, hold on, I didn't know there are so many places that my keys could possibly be in. Like,
You know what's so interesting about that is that we get into that forgetting mode, and usually our keys are in the same spot, right?
right,
But
right.
why is it that that one time
Mhm.
it moved a spot? I'm really interested in that. Like, why
Right.
is it that because we're like in this mode of
Uh-huh.
this invisibleness, why is it that the keys move? That is spooky to me. That's really spooky.
Well, what's really funny about this, and this would be because Heidegger doesn't talk about this. Only Freud does. Freud talks about why you would mispronounce a word, why you would start losing things. It's the unconscious. The unconscious is announcing itself to you
Oh,
out of your out of your because here's the thing, right? When something this happens to me all the time, and I hate it. Anytime something traumatic happens, and like I'm like thinking about like, oh my god, I'm so nervous about this talk or whatever, and that's all I can think about. I misplace my keys. Things start happening
yep.
and going wrong because I am so occupied with what's happening or what's going on or like what's going to happen that I forget my keys, that I misplace things, that I, just silly things, just like really is at least seemingly silly things. But what is Freud saying? Freud saying you're actually unconsciously, depends on the interpretation, sabotaging yourself. You're unconsciously sabotaging yourself.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I have another thought in that as well because you said like the unconscious announcing itself. Okay.
Mm.
Okay. So you know how women like to talk about their problems and they lay it all out on the table, all the whys out on the
Mhm.
table.
Mhm.
And so and then all of a sudden, like, in you remember how I like tried to explain that the solution they're looking for is not the solution that is in front of them.
Mhm.
The solution is it actually exists in the why, in the unconscious. Unconscious. I can't say it. It's late. See, look at this. I'm sabotaging myself. But they'll like talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and lay it all out on the table. Then a like solution
Mhm.
that they never even thought of before just
Mhm.
announces itself.
Mhm.
And that's kind of like I think that's kind of the way I like approach conversations and think too, because like you like explaining this or just kind of laying it all out on the table, then it's like boop, a pop just like ended up in my head that seems completely unrelated to the thing you're talking about, but it's actually related.
Right. And so I was just listening to this wonderful talk, and I know you got to go. I'm being kind about your time. Trying to be kind about your time here.
No, you're good. Oh my
Um,
gosh, I'm just so excited
um,
right now.
um, But I was watching a video. It's about connecting psychoanalysis and phenomenology. And there's something very significant here because phenomenology is concerned about the content. And this also might be a key diagnosis for what you're talking about with the feminine. Because if you're concerned with just the content, you miss the form. The form is why the content is not just seemingly pointless. If you focus on the content, it can be seemingly pointless. But if you look at the form, pay attention to the form, you discover something. Something announces itself. So it's kind of like saying speech is the content, but psychoanalysis looks at the form of the speech.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically saying what's not being said in all this
Mm-hmm.
things that are being said. Right.
What's not
So
being said and all the things that are being said. Yes.
right.
Yes.
So phenomenology, the weakness of phenomenology is that it focuses on the content, about how content shows itself. But the feminine is the form.
Mm-hmm.
How does the content form?
And I would say that it's also a continuously moving form.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. Yes.
And that's why, and because it's continuously moving, that's why thoughts just pop up, just like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, no, I agree. I 100% agree.
I think we did some good groundwork today.
Well, I mean, I think you place it more tangible to me why maybe it's not just Heidegger, but it could also just be like phenomenology kind of has a gap, right? Because can phenomenology explain why you misplace your keys? It can only explain why you know you misplaced your keys.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't belong where they usually belong. Because that's the more ready-to-handedness, right? My keys are usually here. So where are my keys?
Where's the keys?
But it's not going to tell you why you misplaced your keys. It's only going to tell you how you misplaced your keys. Right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That's a preliminary supposition there, but because I'm getting more curious about phenomenology and psychoanalysis and where phenomenology can properly fit and then where psychoanalysis should fit, because psychoanalysis seems to actually do a lot with the things that go out of the ready at hand, all the ruptures. Like, the fact when Freud talks about like you forget something and you like realize like, oh my God, I can't remember this word. Oh my God, what is this word? Or
it's me every day, all day.
Right. Or you like, that's when you're like most conscious of your speech. And then like, when you say something that you didn't mean to say, you're like, oh, that's weird. It throws you out of your familiarity. So it's like the unconscious is what throws you out of this ready at handedness in a lot of ways.
Or
right?
it's like when you hit, like when you're talking normally and then you hit the record button and all of a sudden you can't speak because you're being recorded. I always think that's fascinating. I feel like I can't get into like the conversation well until I forget that it's recording.
Right.
And then I just remembered now it's recording.
Right. Because the unconscious is able to omit and add things. So if recording's like too traumatic for you, it'll just be like, you'll forget. Right. And that's also how we can forget and just go about, like that's why trauma, you can literally forget the event, like what happened. People can literally just be like, I don't remember what happened.
Yup.
they can forget the trauma.
Mhm.
So, and it's kind of like a gift, but also at the same time, it just shows like that the content's not enough to describe what is really happening. So the form needs to be included in what is describing what is happening.
Mhm. I
But
agree.
yeah. All right. I know
This
you
was
have
a great conversation. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Okay. Yeah, I
I
know.
like how you messaged me today, and then all day it's just been like, oh my gosh, what about this and this and this and this?
Yes.
What your
I know.
girlfriend said was just like a catalyst
Oh yeah, I know. I
to
told her that.
completely new ideas.
Right. I know. I was just like, wait a second, you just said something like really good. I was like, hold on, my girlfriend just said something really amazing right now. She was like, and she was just making a joke, and I was like, hold on, I think that joke actually has some substance to it. With
And what's interesting about that is because it was a joke, that's a form of art. So
right.
she was very much looking at it in like that feminine sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ah, this is great. This is great. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. Hope that was enlivening as it was for Sam and I. It was really good. I can't wait to maybe we can like write a paper on this
Yes.
because I feel like it's definitely worth jotting it down. All right, thank you guys for watching. And Sam, if you have any last words, or anything, no pressure, no pressure.
Care authentically. Dasein is care.
Okay. Okay. All right,
That's all
guys.
I got.
Okay, thank you guys for watching. Bye.